Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the first 45th Parliament polling update. I don't want to say like election forecast because obviously there's not going to be election anytime soon, so this doesn't have any. It's not strictly meaningful electoral wise. This is more of an idea where the parties are standing, where momentum is. Uh, if there's any major changes, because the important thing is that the Liberal seats dip below the Conservative seats, or maybe the NDP or the Bloc make some big potential gains. That is a potential for the minority government to fall down. If the Liberals are gaining seats, it might be potential for them to call a snap election, though I don't see a snap election happening at least until COVID's over, whenever that is. But we don't have too much change here from the election. The only main thing is it looks like the NDP are going to pick up a seat in Alberta, an additional seat, and I the Conservatives have picked up a seat, I believe, in BC, or maybe two. Doesn't really matter. There's not a huge change since the election, and we shouldn't be surprised by this. It's only been about a month and a half, maybe. Let's round up to 2 months. It's been about 2 months since the election. There's really not been anything significant since then, so it shouldn't be surprising that there's really no changes. Now, that said, there is some underlying things here that I think are worth noting. Obviously, uh, the People's Party, they have no. I'm for future reference or for future videos, I'm going to now include national polling numbers because I do calculate that. I don't have it here. Oh wait, no, I do have it. Sorry. Here we go. So the People's Party's now sitting at about 5% nationally, but they're doing very well in Saskatchewan and Alberta. Some polls even have. There's even one poll that had them like 20 something percent in Saskatchewan. This is extremely off center. That's weird. I don't know why the screen capture software is doing that. Anyways, and it's and a rate the most recent Angus Reid poll, which admittedly is about 20 days old at this point, which is 13, is noting that the People's Party is particularly gaining steam, gaining people from the Conservative Party right now. The Conservative Party numbers are going down. Right now, they are polling around 32%, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see going forward, if O'Toole stays as the leader and he doesn't manage to make a convincing argument to the right-wing base of the country, that the Conservative Party polling numbers will keep going down. I wouldn't be surprised if at the rate it's going, he gets below 30% in my aggregate model. It's not just Angus Reid doing that, which should be a stern shock to any conservative because Angus Reid polling the Conservatives pretty badly is bad. They tend to be skewed towards the Conservatives and overpoll them marginally. Or at the very least, not underpoll them as badly as every other pollster. But Ledger's also like this, and there's a couple other pollsters that I polls that recently kept Main Street. I can't think of all of them that had the Conservatives either at 30 or below 30 nationally. And I don't disbelieve these. I don't think this is a case where they're necessarily underpolling the Conservatives because most of these polls also had the People's Party doing better than they did in the election. I think the People's Party is starting to mobilize the support of the right wing base, and I think Aaron O'Toole is doing a phenomenal job demoralizing conservatives in this country with his flip flopping and his authoritarian rulingship over the party. Now, some people might argue that pretty much all the parties act very authoritarian like that, but it's very much the antithesis to the grassroots of the Conservative Party and the grassroots preferences to act that authoritarian, and it's going to disillusion a lot of people about that with that kind of action and behavior there. Now, does this mean if there was an election, they won't come back? These conservatives won't come back to the fold? I don't think, or I think it doesn't. I don't think it does mean, or I'm going to rephrase this. I don't think this means that the available voter pool is smaller. Because the important thing with these non-election polls is a lot of it is to do with, do people have confidence in a leader or not? Yes, the Conservative poll numbers are going down. But if O'Toole gave a good campaign and he managed to rally the morale of the Conservatives, he could probably not lose much. He might even gain from 2019, or sorry, 2021. But it is something to be concerned about. If you're losing voting support, you're doing something wrong and you have to address that. Will he address that? Hard to say. He does have the better part of at least 2 years. I don't see an election happening before then. It would just be ridiculous to have an election every 2 years. If Trudeau were to force it, I think he would lose that election, regardless of the merits of O'Toole or not. He nearly lost this last one for triggering a snap election, and people weren't happy with it. And I think further snap elections would make it even worse, particularly since within 2 years, it's unlikely that either COVID or both COVID and the economy will be back to normal. We're facing very high inflation right now, which it looks like the Bank of Canada is at least forecasting will peak in 2022, if not, and they could very well be wrong because they've been saying it was just temporary inflation, and now they're saying it's going to keep going up for at least a few more months before it starts receding again. So there is some grains of salt to be taken with that statement. It could very well have more inflation coming up. And all these things, I think, would make it suicidal for Trudeau to call a snap election. Like, his personal brand is pretty low. I think he would definitely lose more voters in a snap election, so that's not going to happen. The Conservatives aren't going to call an election at least until 2023. I don't think the backbenchers would support it before the leadership review. I will be absolutely shocked. And frankly, I think in the leadership review, at least right now, obviously there's 2 years, so there's time for O'Toole to rally people to his side, but that's typically not how this goes. I foresee that in 2 years, nothing else changing, O'Toole will be removed by the party leadership, and a new leader will be put into place, and there'll probably be an election called within a year of that. Obviously, I don't think Trudeau will call an election while the leadership campaign will go on, because that would look even more cynical and disgusting to the average person than the 2021 election was, which almost lost him the election, his snap election call. Now, the interesting corollary here is there's been a lot of talk, and I'm sure anyone watching this kind of video would be somewhat aware of this, that Trudeau himself might not run again. Now, obviously, he will never say this, or will never say he's not going to run again until he decides not to run again. Because as soon as you say you're not going to run again, no one takes you seriously anymore, and you basically have to step down. That's how Canadian politics works, more or less. But if he were to step down, the best time for him to do that, if he wants an orderly transition of power, would be if the Conservatives remove O'Toole as a leader. Which gets an interesting situation where if O'Toole's not removed, Justin's probably going to contest the next election. If O'Toole is removed, he might not. Now, that's not to say I think Trudeau will necessarily step down, but that is the only time he could comfortably step down without throwing everything in the towel, because there's been, I think we're at 4 or 5 prime ministers now in history who succeeded after the incumbent, like there's an incumbent prime minister, they pass the reins off to someone else to finish the term. They're in office for 6 months to a year, and then they get smashed in the election. It's happened 4 or 5 times, and I don't think the most successful counterexample is Paul Martin, who only won a minority, and not by a huge margin, and then lost the next election. I think it was 20 months later. So there's really not much evidence to suggest that a pass off while the main opposition is unified will work very well. But a pass off while the main opposition is changing their own leader very well could work. Will Trudeau do this? I don't know. It's very difficult to say. I would be inclined to say no, just that he seems like a prideful man, and going for the fourth win seems like something he would want to like cement his legacy. And leaving after COVID's been all handled would also leave him off on a better note than leaving mid-pandemic. Well, it's hard to say even mid-pandemic these days, but before everything's returned to normal, it would be a bit of a worse note than leaving after everything has been returned to normal. There's lots of factors there. Now, nationally, what I expect to happen going forward here in the next couple of years, I don't think the Greens are going to survive. I think the party's back is broken. Elizabeth May's probably going to keep her seat until she retires, but once she retires, she's not going to be replaced by a Green. I think she's going to be replaced by an NDP. Mike Morris in Kitchener Center, I believe it's Kitchener Center, is probably not even going to win a re-election. I would be very surprised. If he does win re-election, it will only be the only reason I think he could win re-election at this point. No offense to that man in particular. I have no idea about him as an MP, so I can't really comment if he's qualified or not, or if he's good or not. But he's in a very liberal area, and I assume the Liberal Party, if they run a solid candidate as opposed to no candidate, as in 2019 or 2021, that he will lose his seat unless the Liberals lose that election. If the Liberals lose that election, he's probably going to get reelected. If the Liberals win the next election, I don't think he will get reelected. And at the point that the Greens have no MPs, I think the party dies. If they can manage to keep 1 or 2 MPs going, maybe they have a chance. But if they go to 0, they don't have the base. They don't have the momentum. They don't have the money. They don't have the base. They don't even have the issues. Because yes, the Green Party is very into the green issues, but you can't really say they're significantly more than the NDP or even significantly more than the Liberals. Both Liberals and NDP have brought in very aggressive climate plans since 2021, and there's no reason to think they'll have any less aggressive going forward. I just do not see anywhere in this landscape of politics in Canada that the Green Party can survive. It's either going to merge the NDP, because it's very left-wing now as well, or it will die as a party. It's hard to say, for sure. But I would be very surprised if the Green Party is a meaningful party come 2025. Which is actually when I think the next election will be. It'll probably be that year. I don't think it's going to happen before then. I think this will be the longest minority parliament in nation's history. If 2019 was a majority government, and in the 2021 election, I guess this wouldn't, I don't know. Doesn't matter. This is going to probably be the longest minority parliament. At least that's what it looks like it's going into. The only other main thing in question right now is the People's Party. And the main question with the People's Party is, will the People's Party eclipse, divide, or die? Now, eclipse as in, will they supersede the Conservative Party? Now, it might seem outlandish right now, but if O'Toole, hypothetically, stays on and contests the 2025 election and loses and the Liberals get a majority, and there's no good argument, like O'Toole has no way to pitch to himself that he's done well. Like, if O'Toole managed to gain, let's say, 2% vote share, but the Liberals managed to, like, didn't absorb the entirety of the NDP and they won because of that, I don't think O'Toole would take flack over it too much. Like, let's say Jagmeet Singh resigns and the NDP elect some, like, I don't know, some absolute, like, communist, like, full-on Stalinist as their leader. Then the Liberals could easily win a majority because I think a lot of the NDP voters would vote Liberal instead of for, like, a full-on, like, Stalin 2.0. But outside of that outlandish scenario, the most likely thing that would happen is, if Trudeau to win a majority, would be the Conservatives lose vote share, and if they lose more vote share and more seats, I could very well see the party going the way of the PC party and just getting absolutely shrunken and then eclipsed by the People's Party. The other alternative here is that the People's Party just splits the base, and you get what happened in the 90s where we had the PC Party and the Reform Party. That is, I think, the most likely outcome, especially if you see where the People's Party is strong, because if you bring back over this again, remember, they're the strongest out west, and for some reason in New Brunswick, and a little bit in Ontario. But Atlantic Canada for the most part, and Quebec, not particularly strong. Not that weak, I mean, they're still outperforming the Greens in every place but PEI. And I guess the territories, but that's more of a quirk of the model. And then, now, the final possible outcome I described here, die, is the People's Party could recede. Like, let's say, doesn't matter why, Maxime Bernier resigns as leader. It's very possible that the next leader of the People's Party is not able to garner the populism / dynamism that Bernier has, and the party could fall apart as a result. Or the next leader could decide, oh, we got to shift to the center more, or we get to shift to the extreme and leave the spot where they are. Because I think right now where the People's Party are is it's a very palatable party to most actual conservatives, but most actual conservatives in the country don't want to vote for them out of fear of vote splitting. But what the party policies themselves do seem to appeal to most conservatives. Now, the Red Tory branch of the Conservative Party, hard to say how much they agree with the People's Party's policies, but that's why I think the divide scenario is actually the most likely. I think the people who I would define as conservatives might all end up becoming part of the People's Party, and then you'll be left with the rump of the Conservative Party, which is the Red Tory branch, which will be, well, the Red Tory branch. And they'll probably both have similar number of votes. I would assume the People's Party in this regard would probably be closer to 20-25% range, and the other ones will have lower. Excuse the Steam notifications. I should close that next time, but for now, whatever. It's not done. Now, if we ever actually got proportional representation, I think this kind of division would actually make more sense, a proportional system, because you could better capture the vote, and then if the two conservative parties or right of center parties wanted to coalition, they could coalition. Though, I personally, and I might get into this in some other future video, if people want me to, I don't think proportional representation systems are actually a good idea for Canada for various reasons. Mostly because it's a huge country, geographically, and not a lot of people in it. But second, the results of how those elections end up working, I don't think are actually very good for most societies. It can work. Like, I wouldn't say places like Switzerland, which have a very proportional system, are like collapsing. But a lot of it seems that there's a higher propensity of proportional run systems to be very divided and stuck with incessant internal squabbling like Italy. Or you end up getting the opposite situation where it's basically just the same party winning every single election. Like Germany, like, yes, I realize in the last German election the CDU did not win, but they've won most they participate in almost all governments in Germany. So there's a lot of cons, and you could also argue the Liberals form almost all the governments in Canada. So that's a future video if people want to talk about it. I could go into great detail about it. I don't know if people actually care about my personal views on electoral systems. If you do, I don't know, let me know, and I'll talk about it. But until then, this is what we got. So, to shortly summarize here, so what do we have? Well, the Conservatives are infighting following a loss and are divided between two parties. Very familiar for Canadian politics. The Liberals have shifted left of center and strongly appeal to left of center people, but they're no longer a broad mass appeal party of Chrétien. They can win elections because of this, because they appeal very strongly to the large urban centers and nowhere else. A little bit to the old people in the Maritimes, but mostly just large urban centers they appeal very heavily to, and not much else. They can win elections, but they can't win majorities with that. The NDP is too left-wing and is useless and doesn't win anything. And yes, I think if the NDP went more centrist, they would win more seats. Now, that actually said, for NDP supporters, that might not actually do anything useful for you, because if the Liberals have shifted left to center and will seem to perpetually win elections because the Conservatives are dumb and they don't know how to run an election campaign, it seems, and the Liberals never win a majority because they're too left of center to actually get enough votes to win a majority, then the NDP being radical but 20, 30-ish seats doesn't hurt them. So there's that. They'll never form government at this rate, though. They have to shift significantly more towards the center to actually ever have a hope of winning an election. The Bloc, obviously, the Bloc of the Bloc. The Bloc does Bloc things. I would assume the Bloc will continue to be a strong force. I think the only hiccup in the Bloc's future will be when Blanchette inevitably dies or resigns. That one of those two things will 100% happen one day. Maybe 50 years from now. Maybe tomorrow. It's not, obviously, I'm not a Quebecer, so I don't know much about the Bloc internal politics, but it's not necessarily obvious who could who would be a successor potential for Blanchette, and Blanchette himself is a big part of the reason why the party is being very successful. He's very good at splitting the rallying the Francophone Quebecers to his side. One, Francophone issues are not necessarily the dominant issue in campaigns, and he's very good at splitting the difference between aligning with the I'm blanking on it. Coalition Avenir Quebec and left of center politics of Quebec federally. So it's a very tough job to replace Blanchette, frankly. Bernier, I think, is going to keep going up, and he's keep going to gain votes. I don't foresee him winning many seats going forward. Just the way he's gaining vote share, like, if we go back to here, like, whoop-de-doo, you have 8% vote share in Alberta. You're not going to win a seat in Alberta with 8% vote share when the Conservatives still are sitting at 54%. Like, it's not going to happen. If they maybe, the one poll, I can't remember the pollster, who had Saskatchewan like the 20s or something. Yeah, maybe at that percentage range, they might pick up some rural seats, but very unlikely still. The main thing is, I think the People's Party is either going to, as I said earlier, the way it's getting supported its only hope actually doing anything meaningful is to supersede the Conservatives in some areas, or all areas. Until that happens, I don't think it's going to actually have a meaningful breakthrough other than putting pressure on the Conservatives to go more right wing. And then the Greens, I think the Greens have done what a small party is actually supposed to do. They made climate issues go from just a thing, like an additional thing, to being a core issue with their campaigning. I don't think they have really anywhere to go from here. They failed at converting to a real party in 2019 and in 2021. And they've completely fallen apart now. Last I heard, they were very low on money, and I think they were selling their HQ, but I had to double check that to be certain. But they have a new leader now, obviously, after Paul resigned. But Paul's leadership, because of the internal infighting that it caused, was just an absolute disaster for the party. As a non-Green Party member, I don't want to say who's to blame there. Possibly everybody in the party, but that infighting has really destroyed the party and broken their image nationally. And I just struggle to see how a leader should come back from this. Like, we have Amita Kuttner right now as the interim leader. Maybe she could do well, but we all saw how much trouble it was for Aaron O'Toole to break out in the election period after he won the Conservative leadership race, and a smaller, more insignificant party just gonna have an even harder time. So I think the party's doomed. Now, that all said, if you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe. It does help the channel, and it does make me feel good about myself when people actually watch these. It's a lot of work. It feels good when people experience it and don't. Nice door. What is it? Nice self-confidence boost. But anyways, hope you all enjoy yourselves and have a good day. And I will see you probably next week with another French election update. It's not 100% certain but it looks like there's going to be enough of a change that it will be worth watching or worth making a video for. Otherwise, hope you all have a good day.